Hey, this is author Kristi Hugstad, and I'm here kicking it with Doree.
Let's kick it! Welcome to the Kicking It with Doree show. I'm your host, Doree Allen-Nieves, and today my guest is Kristi Hugstad. For all of Kristi Hugstad's adult life, her original goal was clear: to provide the highest opportunity for the ultimate fitness and health for everyone who walked into her studio or gym, which is a feat that she accomplished daily for years, until an unimaginable day in October 2012, when in one tragic moment, everything changed. Kristi is now a speaker and an author that shares her personal experience and professional expertise in grief recovery. Her mission is to reach out to those wrestling with grief and offer the opportunity to find a safe place to confront their pain and fears, to address them, change them, and ultimately move through them to a new perspective and new life. Welcome to the show, Kristi.
Thank you so much for having me, Doree.
I'm really glad to be able to talk with you about this really important topic that in our 70-some episodes here at Kicking It with Doree, we've never addressed, which is shocking. You would think that at this point, we would have addressed it by now. Maybe if I was at like 370, then,
You're not alone in kind of, not getting to it yet, because really there still is such a huge stigma associated with mental illness and depression, and particularly suicide, that it's a real tough topic for people to tackle. So thank you so much for having the courage to discuss this and have me on your show.
Of course. And I'm going to thank you right now for being here and for sharing your very personal story. And I know it's going to help so many people that will be listening to this podcast, some people that we may never meet, but we can save their lives. So I'm going to get right to it. So as I just described in your introduction, you are a grief counselor, but the way that you became a grief counselor was not something that you necessarily had planned, because you were really big into the health and fitness industry. What happened is you experienced a really devastating loss that changed your life forever. Would like you to tell us the story of the way that your life was before and after this loss, and how it led you to where you are today, helping others.
Well, first of all, my husband Bill and I seem to have the perfect life in Southern California. We each owned a gym separately. We were introduced by a mutual client. We dated, got married. Eventually, we consolidated our gyms, and for 5 years had a very successful business. Everything seems to be perfect. Our people in our community envied our lifestyle. We had plenty of time off. We bought a vacation home in Rosarito, Mexico, and we seemed to have everything on the outside. But what people didn't understand, what was going on behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. And I didn't know this myself. I actually learned a lot of things about my husband, Bill, the hard way. Bill suffered from depression. However, he was the great pretender. He could pretend things were okay. People loved him. He was known as the gentle giant, this huge bodybuilder, and he was loved and respected by everybody. As his wife, I didn't know what depression looked like, and I found out the hard way. So eventually we ended up selling our gym to one of our personal trainers, and we moved to our little haven in Rosarito, Mexico, and we decided we're going to retire early and just enjoy being on the ocean in Mexico. And that was great for about 3 months. And then after all the tourists started to go home and the weather started to change, Bill started to change with our situation. So he started to get angry about little things. He started not sleeping. He had insomnia, everything that he so appreciated, because keep in mind, this was his dream to have a vacation home in Rosarito. So how could he be so angry when he's actually living his dream? So I noticed the changes in his personality. They started slowly. But after a couple months, when the weather was cold and drizzly every day, he stayed up 4 nights screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get me out of here. I hate it here. What are we doing here? I feel so alone." And I didn't understand what that meant. Now, also keep in mind, he'd been taking lots of different prescription drugs, Xanax, Halcion for sleep. And then when we got down there, he'd run out of these prescriptions. And so he started taking different things, Valium, trying to get himself calmed down, reduce his anxiety, and sleep. But things never got any better. I took him to a psychiatrist in Rosarito. Nobody could help. So I decided we needed to get out of Mexico because at the time, this for my husband was a traumatic life event, moving out of his comfort zone. Whereas for me, I thought it was just an exciting adventure. So we moved back to Dana Point, California, where we had lived and grown our businesses. And I thought that's all it would take to make him happy and get my husband, the old Bill, back. So we moved back to Dana Point, and the same symptoms kept happening, only they were getting worse. We moved to a tiny apartment, and he would say, get me out of here. I hate it here. I haven't lived like this since college. So whatever he would say, I would try to fix. So I moved him into a duplex that was actually on the water, what he was used to. So I thought for sure that would make him happy. I hate this. We're facing south instead of east. I couldn't win, but yet I kept trying to fix everything. So one morning I got up and I went in the kitchen and I saw a note on the kitchen table and it said, Kristi, you deserve better. I hate myself. I can't take it any longer. I'm done. Love, Bill. And then I saw a bottle of Ambien, which is a sleeping aid, next to the suicide note. But yet I could hear him in the shower. So I ran into the shower and I said, Bill, what is going on? And he said, I took an entire bottle of Ambien, but yet I woke up in the morning. Now, I didn't know if it was a cry for help or if he'd actually taken those 20 Ambien, because in my mind at that time, I thought there's no way you could have survived this. But I wasn't sure, so I called my sister and she came out, and then together we coaxed him to get in the car, and I took him to Mission Hospital, to the ER, and I ran inside the emergency room and I said, my husband has tried to kill himself and I don't know what to do and I need help. And the nurses took him by the hand. They said, don't worry, we've got it from here. Then that was the first time I actually started to feel a sense of relief, like, wow, I'm finally getting the help I needed. So they put him on a 5150 hold, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a 3-day involuntary suicide watch. And basically that's what they did. They sedated him, kept him in the ER for 3 days. And then a psychiatrist interviewed him and said, why did you take those pills? And he said, I was not trying to kill myself. I just couldn't sleep. And now I know that since they had no beds in their psychiatric unit, they just released him because he said he didn't need help. So I got the call to come and pick him up, and we just drove home. I was just shocked and thinking, now I'm going back to where I was trying to get Bill help. So fast forwarding, one Sunday morning, I get up and he's gone. So 8 hours go by. I call the police. They actually filed a missing persons report because they knew him. And after 8 hours, he came back in our place and I said, where have you been? And he said, I was just down at the train tracks pacing up and down the sidewalk for 8 hours. And I could tell that he was telling the truth because the top of his head was blistered. And I didn't understand why he would just pace up and down the sidewalk for an entire day. So it really didn't click with me, and I didn't understand what was going on. And about 3 days later, I'm in the bathroom, and he walks into the bathroom door, and he puts his arms across the entryway, and he said, Kristi, tell me who you are having an affair with. I've gone through your closet, and there's a pair of jeans missing. And I said, what? I've got 30 pairs of jeans. I wouldn't know if a pair of jeans was missing. And he said, I want a name. And I said, okay, John Smith. And he said, you're lying. And I said, Bill, what are you doing? You're scaring me. Let me out. And so I had to physically push my way past him. And I grabbed, my keys and my purse. And I said, I'm leaving. You're scaring me. I'm going to go spend the evening with my sister. So I left. And for the next few hours, phone call after phone call, I thought, Bill, I don't know what's going on, but now I'm scared. So I spend the night at my sister's, and the next morning I'm driving home, And the phone calls from Bill had stopped. But I could see that there were phone calls, one after another, from his parents in Houston, Texas. So I picked up my phone and I called his mother and I said, Beth, it's okay. We just had a little spat. I spent the night at my sister's and she stopped me. She cut me off and she said, Kristi, there's been an accident and I think Bill might be dead. And I said, what? And she said, go down to the hotel in the harbor. His dad is staying at the hotel. And I thought, how could he have gotten here so quickly? He's in Texas. I'm in California. So it was pouring rain and I drive to the hotel and I storm through the front door and scream at the desk clerk to give me Bill's dad's room number. And when I got up there, Bill's dad was just straight-faced. I said, what is going on? And he said, Kristi, just sit down. I'm waiting for a return call from the coroner. I said, what? And he said, I got a call at 5:30 in the morning this morning from Bill. And he said, Dad, I'm in trouble. My brain is scrambled. And he said, don't worry, son. I will get on the next plane to Orange County. So Bill's father flew from Houston, Texas to San Diego. And then he boarded a train from San Diego to Orange County. And he had called his son several times. Please pick me up at the train station. I will be there at 5:40. So they had been communicating off and on all day. So at 5:20, Bill Sr., Bill's father's train from San Diego comes to a screeching halt. And everybody was texting the passengers on the train saying, hey, there's been a mechanical, there's going to be at least a 4-hour delay. But then there were all these, like 100 emergency vehicles, ambulances, police cars. And while they sat there, other people started texting the passengers on the train saying, you know, this is not a mechanical. There was a man that stood in front of the train and killed himself. So Bill's father doesn't think anything of it. He proceeds, 4 hours later, the train pulls into San Juan Capistrano, and he looks around for his son's car, and he's not there, and he figures, he must have gotten tired of waiting for me. So his father gets a cab down to the harbor and goes to bed. And the next morning, he's in the break room, and all these people, all the other guests at the hotel are talking about this young man that had stood in front of a train last night and killed himself. So his father started to put two and two together and went up to his room and called the coroner. That's when I entered. And we sat together, and the coroner finally called back and confirmed the fact that, yes, it was his son who had run in front of the train that he was on the night before. So that's my story.
I don't even know what to say. What do you say to that? I mean, even if you tell that story 100 times, I can't imagine it gets any easier.
Well, you know what? It doesn't. It'll be 5 years this October 10th. And looking back, I was searching for answers, because when you're in that kind of debilitating grief, you just want to know why, and I have searched for 5 years for those answers. So now I'm a lot more comfortable sharing my story because I am not owning it. Initially, I felt like it was all my fault because I couldn't get Bill the help that he needed. So I think, I think a lot of times people feel that there's no such thing as death without guilt. And that's the first emotion that I felt. Oh my gosh, I didn't get him help. This is all my fault. So I've come a long way in these past 5 years from taking, the blame personally.
Do you think that, if you had been home, that he couldn't have or wouldn't have done it? I'm sure that all these different scenarios run through your mind because you were staying with your sister.
Absolutely. I thought the one night throughout our 8-year marriage that we didn't spend together was the day that he killed himself. So the first thought, yes, of course, was had I stayed home and just dealt with his anger and his paranoia, he would have not done it. So, who knows if that would have been the case or not, but that was, you were dead on. That was the first thing that went through my mind. And then the second thing was, I didn't get him the right help. We went to 3 different psychiatrists, a church counselor, a psychologist. He was prescribed all different kinds of meds. And I guess at the time I thought maybe there was that one perfect pill that would give me back the husband that I married. So I also blame myself for not getting him to the correct people to get help.
Well, I think that's a really common thing when people, suffer a great loss or begin to grieve, is thinking about what they could have done. Now, I want to go back a little bit because there were so many things that you talked about in that story, which, by the way, is covered right in the beginning of her book, What I Wish I Had Known. But is there a good way to tell that somebody's hiding their mental illness? A lot of people get anxiety. A lot of people get depressed about different things. I mean, I don't know. I was married to someone that had a mental illness and, he was able to hide it in certain ways. But, sometimes you really aren't aware and sometimes you're just trying to ignore it or, brush it off like no big deal.
Well, yeah. And I guess, and I'll cover all the warning signs and risk factors that were there. I mean, I just gave you a brief synopsis of the story. But I guess the most important thing that I've learned in the past 5 years is depression is not just sadness. I mean, we all feel sad and depressed when things aren't going right. But depression is that feeling of sadness that lasts 2 weeks or longer, and that dark cloud is always lingering over their head. And they're sad even when things in their life are going right. So that's the difference. And Bill's depression went on for months. No matter what I did, no matter what was going on, he was angry, depressed, negative. And if outside observer looked at him and looked at our lives, the common response would be, what in the world did he have to be depressed about? He sold his gym. He made plenty of money. He bought a vacation home. He's got freedom. That's kind of what all of us working so hard strive to do. So from the outside observer, you would not understand that depression doesn't discriminate. It was not Bill's choice to have depression. It's a disease. It's a chemical imbalance of the brain, and it needs to be treated as such. And over 90% of people that complete suicide have depression. So if depression is an illness and can be treated, then over 90% of those people that die of suicide would not have had to die. So, I mean, that's kind of an overview of, the profile of the type of person that completes suicide. It's the depression that is, it's a disease. But as far as other signs of mental illness, the warning signs and risk factors were all there in front of me. The insomnia, either sleeping too much or sleeping not, too little. One extreme or the other is a warning sign of depression and suicide. And he did both. He couldn't sleep for 4 days, and then he would stay in bed all day. So he had that. He wasn't eating. He was losing weight. He was full of self-loathing. He felt hopeless. He felt like, the world was grim and bleak. There was just nothing in his brain chemistry that brought out any glimmer of hope or happiness whatsoever. And another thing that was interesting, his father came down to Rosarito to visit us. And one night he sat at the kitchen table and he started crying. And we said, Bill, what's wrong? And he said, I don't know if I've ever told either of you this, but both of Bill's grandmothers had a suicide attempt. And I thought, well, that is sad. It was an attempt. They didn't die. But at the time, I didn't realize the significance of that confession, because genetics is a factor in depression and suicide. If you have a family history of depression or mental illness in your family, you are at greater risk for having it yourself. So that was something I didn't realize. And, when you talked about your ex-husband, there might have been a history in his genetics of some forms of mental illness.
Absolutely.
Right? So now you think back and you look at that, those are warning signs that you weren't aware of, and now kind of puts pieces of the puzzle together.
Sometimes you think, well, this person is going through it or whatever, and, that's their mother or that's their grandmother, whatever, but, he's okay though. Like, he's good. And it's just because of the way that they're able to hide it,
Right. And also the prior attempts is a huge risk factor. So that, when I was telling the story about him leaving a suicide note with the empty bottle of Ambien next to it.
Yeah.
Now, had I known that they're 4 times more likely to attempt again, that would have been a huge red flag. But all I did is question whether or not he actually took those pills. But I didn't see it as a risk factor, like, okay, that is a prior attempt, which makes it likely that he will try again.
Yeah, sometimes we just don't want to believe things. I mean, you said in the beginning of your book that you are a fixer, and because, you like to help people and you like to fix things, and, you grew up really well, that you somehow didn't realize it, but you were enabling his behavior as it began to get worse over that period of time.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that I also am a credentialed health teacher, right? So I go to high schools and I talk to, say, 9th grade health classes about the warning signs, risk factors, myths, what to do, where to go for help. So I have another little booklet called Are You Okay for Teens? And it's all about teen depression and suicide. And I use my husband's story, and I ask the students to write down the risk factors and warning signs as my story unfolds. So it's an actual active learning tool. They don't just go home and say, hey, Mom, this lady came to our school today and told us a really sad story. I mean, when they leave there, they have the tools to, possibly save somebody's life. And then at the end, I will always say, you know what? Having heard my story, now you know the warning signs and risk factors. If you were me, what would you have done differently? And now keep in mind, these are 15-year-old students, right? And one girl raised her hand and she said, I think if I were you, I would have stopped trying to fix everything and maybe just listened and sat down next to him with your hand on his leg and said, you know what, can we talk about how you're feeling? And I would have asked Bill the question that's the title of your book for us, Bill, are you okay? And I thought, wow.
That's amazing.
Talk about a 15-year-old giving me a wake-up call. But you know what? She was completely right. So I thought, yeah, this information and these warning signs and risk factors and myths and information about your brain chemistry, this stuff needs to be taught at a young age. These kids in school at 14 and 15 need to be equipped with this knowledge so they don't ever have to experience the pain that I went through. I don't want this story to be replicated and be somebody else's life.
There is a show that was it was a Netflix exclusive. I want to say it was like either the spring or the summer. My daughter and my stepdaughter ate it up. And I think it was called 13 Reasons Why. And yeah, and that talks about a teen suicide. I did not watch every episode, but is there anything in that show that resonated with you as you work with teens?
Oh, wow. Boy, you hit a nerve right there. I watched all 13 episodes. And you're right. It's about Hannah, who's a high school student, and she completes suicide. And the 13 reasons are 13 people in her life that she blames for her suicide. And she has a box of tapes, and each tape is one person who caused her suicide. And after they listen to their tape, they're instructed to give that box to the next person. So it's it's very, very well done. I have to give Netflix credit for that, but it kind of unfolds as a murder mystery. So it's very, very addictive to watch. But what the problem with it was, and they're going to do there's going to be another series. The problem with it was they didn't offer these teens any hope. It was basically Hannah was depressed. She took her life. These people were responsible. And they didn't address the fact that, hey, Hannah had depression. These other kids and students, yeah, they might have bullied her. They might have contributed to it. But the depression was to blame. And they didn't offer hope or tools or resources. So I also am a blogger for the Huffington Post. And if you go on, you can Google the Grief Girl or my name. And I have written several blogs on the HuffPost about 13 Reasons Why. And my last one is titled 13 Reasons Why Not. And what I do there is I list 13 reasons why not to complete suicide. So yeah, that was kind of a sore spot with me. And I do think that Netflix has put out a lot of information that in their next series, they are going to focus a little bit more on giving some tools and not just making it into, a really engrossing Netflix series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really sensitive. I used to be a youth speaker, and my main focus was talking about media literacy and how we have to learn how to be conscious consumers of media, which means that we have to understand why that piece of media, whether it's a video game, a movie, a TV show, a song, why was it made? Where is that person coming from? What message are they trying to get across or make you believe? And then discuss it with others. You don't have to accept necessarily what that message is, but we don't want the kids to just listen to the song or watch the movie and be like, oh, this is the way life really is, and not ask any questions and not, do anything else with it.
Well, exactly. And, I think for a teen watching that, in my opinion, they actually kind of glamorized suicide, like made it kind of a cool thing to possibly do or to entertain the idea. And I mean, it was not reality. I mean, these teens are impressionable, their brains aren't developed, they're very impulsive. So it kind of scared me that suicide was so glamorized in that series. And that's just, they need to show the reality of what it does to people's lives who are left behind. And that wasn't the case in the first few episodes.
Yeah. Okay. Now I got to go back and watch the rest of it.
It's really well done, but when you watch it, you'll see what I'm talking about of what was missing, because those young minds are very impressionable. And I do know, too, that supposedly, there's copycat suicides. And so when a celebrity, like such a Robin Williams or somebody that's highly admired, typically in the press, like you were talking about, they don't really put the method of suicide. Because of that exact thing, there are copycat suicides that happen after, say, a celebrity takes their own life.
Yes.
And so I can't speak for if that Netflix series actually, caused teen suicide, but there's always that possibility. That's why it's so important to be careful about what you put in front of these young minds. They're impressionable.
Do you know of a girl in need of some good advice on body image, dating relationships, toxic friendships, premarital sex, building self-esteem, and setting goals? What's Wrong with Me by Doree Allen is a powerful memoir of stories with life lessons that they can use. Get your copy of What's Wrong with Me on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today.
Hey, this is author Kristi Hugstad. I have 2 newly released books, What I Wish I'd Known, Finding Your Way Through the Tunnel of Grief, and a book for teens called Are You Okay? Teen Depression and Suicide. And I'm here kicking it with Doree.
So I want to just talk about something that underlies the topic of grief a little bit, something that I don't get to address very much, but I feel very strongly about, and that has to do with the way people grieve, specifically the most popular way people, I don't know if I should say popular, but a common way that people grieve is to cry. Some people also scream or shout or act indifferent, but crying is something that seems to be frowned upon in our society. Not everyone cries when they're sad. Not everyone cries at funerals or when society expects them to. But I notice that whether it's a program or in real life, myself or someone else, it seems like when someone is crying in public, they are usually very apologetic about the fact that they were crying, as if they had to be strong all the time, or they don't want that person to see, or that it's a sign of weakness that they are letting out their emotions in this way. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cry in front of you, and they feel bad about it. Not that they should.
You're absolutely right. It's our society that has led us to believe that crying is a sign of weakness, particularly for men. They have been taught as young boys from their fathers and grandfathers that crying is not something that boys and men do because it shows that you're weak, which is absolutely ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing, the first thing that really is something that you need to do for healthy grieving and to move forward in the grieving journey is to feel your emotions. And we all express our emotions differently, but crying, if you think back when you really had a good, deep cry to the point where you're kind of hiccuping and you can't catch your breath, when you go back and you remember those really, really hard cries, do you remember how relaxed and calm you feel after that? That's because you really have dropped your blood pressure, your heart rate goes down, and it does create a sense of peace. There's actually a chemical in your tear ducts that are called encephalins, and they help to reduce stress. So crying is one of the healthiest things that you can do, and it's not just to relieve grief or loss, it's to relieve stress because it does actually have a calming effect on your body. So it's our society that has passed this down in generations, and it's absolutely ridiculous because a lot of times if you don't cry and let it out, all that pent up emotion and stress comes out as anger.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's right. And then that's when people do things, acts of violence or whatever, because it's all this cumulative grief that's been stuffed down deep inside. Oh, so yeah. I can't stress how important it is to feel your emotions.
Yeah, I think it's crazy too. And I just want people to know that however you want to display your emotions, you have the right to do that. We're very well versed with the stages of grief. Sometimes we want to regulate what order you go in those stages. If you go back to stage 3 or stage 4, if you are in grief for a number of years. And I really don't know that you can tell someone that they should get over a loss. I mean, even like saying that, you should get over it, that's very offensive. I mean, you don't know what that person is going through. It doesn't matter if it happened 5 days ago or 5 years ago, like you just said. People need to be more sensitive and more compassionate and more empathetic about things like that.
Well, and you know what? That is such a sore spot with me. I will let all of your listeners know that you will not get over a debilitating grief of somebody, especially that you loved deeply. And don't think that you will. So getting over it is just not a possibility, but you can move forward in your grief process. But you will discover a new normal for yourself, which is good and healthy. But if somebody says, oh, your husband died 5 years ago, aren't you over it yet? That to me is so offensive. And yeah. I actually will say, and I never will be over it. That just means that, I will never forget Bill. He'll always be a part of me. And getting over to me signifies that I'm done with him, I've forgotten it, and I'm moving on with my life. And that's just not reality for any of us. So you're right, that is a really insensitive comment. But as far as you're talking about the stages of grief, that you should move through those. Well, that doesn't happen either. And the stages of grief really, really don't apply most of the time. I mean, I will speak for myself personally. The first stage of grief is denial. I didn't deny that Bill had killed himself because I'd been living with this for months. So I didn't deny that it was my reality. The first emotion that I felt was guilt, and then anger is the second, bargaining with God, if only you bring him back, I'll go to church every Sunday, whatever. Then the depression, and then the fifth stage is acceptance. But the truth of that is there are really no stages and they're not linear. And what happens, it's like a roller coaster ride. They repeat themselves. So instead of calling them stages of grief, I like to call them common responses because they're not all felt by everybody and they don't happen in a linear order. And oftentimes they repeat themselves. So when I let people know that, then they feel like, you know what, I'm not crazy. I'm not losing my mind because now I'm angry again and I should be over that stage. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's better that people actually just look at how they're feeling as common responses and they're not necessarily stages of grief.
Yes, yes. And you talk about that in part 2 of your book, different ways to move through grief and all kinds of losses. And each chapter is named with a simple one word action verb, which I love. I'm not going to give it away. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you guys check out the book, What I Wish I'd Known, and be able to move through those stages of grief even before you have a loss. If you have a loss, of course, it'll be a great tool for you. But if you haven't, it's still something that you need to explore. And I want to ask you with that, Kristi, what do you wish you had known?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I've got pages and pages, but I think most importantly, I wish I had known who Bill really was. What were his thoughts? What were the warning signs and risk factors of depression and suicide? They were all there. I wish I'd known the significance of Bill's genetics or the effects of prescription drugs and going off them cold turkey without going through a weaning off process. I wish I'd known that this was not going to go away on its own and that Bill needed inpatient treatment. I wish I'd known about Bill's sense of hopelessness, low esteem. I wish I'd known that I can't fix everything or that this was bigger than me, that moving to Mexico was a traumatic life event for Bill. And that was probably one of the worst things we could have done because it gave him a place to isolate. I also learned that there's no streamlined treatment for mental health issues. We went to the ER and basically got a 3-day hold and then he was released. So our mental health system needs a lot of work. There is there wasn't any help for him. I wish I'd known that grief was going to be a long, hard process and that I will grieve in some form forever and that time doesn't heal my pain. I just have to take action towards my healing instead of just waiting for it to heal itself. I don't know. I guess there's so many things that I wish I'd known, but that was my whole incentive for writing the book because I didn't know those things. So if I can share them with somebody else, maybe I can help save their life or that of someone that they love.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's why I was saying a moment ago, get the book even if you're not grieving right now, even if you've never lost someone close to you in your life. You want to be equipped because life happens.
Well, and you know what? I guess, my story isn't the main part of the book. I give 10 tools for grief recovery, but really those 10 tools are 10 tools for life. Whether you're stressed, which all of us have stress, those 10 tools apply to everybody every day. And the method that I came up with them is because once Bill died, I needed answers. I needed my questions answered. I needed to know why. And so I bought every grief book there was. I bought every, I was journaling, I was whatever. And I would get a couple sentences out of each book that kind of made me feel good for the time being. But I couldn't find the one book that actually gave me specific tools. So that inspired me to write it myself. So you're right. It's not just for people that are grieving.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you did. And I'm even more grateful that you were able to not only share your book with us, but to share your story again and to bring this into another realm for yourself as far as helping other people that are grieving and in recovery. As you said, it is a lifelong thing. It's not a thing that you just get over. You'll always, carry some of those memories and great times and even some of the sadness with you as the years go by. But we can listen to Kristi on her show, The Grief Girl. She has a radio show and podcast called The Grief Girl. And of course, the book that she wrote is called What I Wish I'd Known. And it is now available brand new. It just came out in September. Where can we find you on the internet, on social media?
The best way to find all of my social media is to go on my website at thegriefgirl.com. All my podcasts for The Grief Girl on OC Talk Radio are posted there. And all my links to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are there as well. So thegriefgirl.com.
I'm really grateful that you joined us here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share my message. Thanks, Doree. I think it's really important for people to realize that as you go through life, pain and growth can coexist. I never really thought of that statement like that before. I thought you were either in pain, you were sad, or you were happy. But it's important for your listeners to know that pain and growth can coexist in your heart. And I guess my mantra, my tagline is that grief is not your enemy, that grief is your teacher.
Thank you for listening and for kicking it with me. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe and tell your friends about it. Kicking It with Daree is brought to you by DAREE. That stands for Delivering a Rich, Empowering Experience. Visit me online and join my email list at DareeAllen.com.